Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Dr. Matt Moore about tailwater recovery systems. Tailwater recovery systems help farmers struggling with water quality and quantity by recycling runoff into irrigation water. It's supposed that recovery ditches used in these systems can help excess nutrients and pesticides to settle out before on-field delivery. But as with all things research, the theory needs to be tested. This episode, Matt joins us to discuss his work getting to the bottom of water quality questions for tailwater recovery systems. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but before we dive in, we want to thank our sponsor for this episode, Meter Group. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their new podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers leverage environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Matt Moore with us. Matt grew up working on his parents' row crop farm in northeast Arkansas, where they raised rice and soybeans. He went to college and majored in biology with the intention of going to medical school, but changed his mind halfway through his undergraduate degree and started volunteering with a professor in environmental science. He finished his bachelor's in biology at Arkansas State University, then stayed for a master's in biology, focusing on environmental toxicology. His master's research was related to herbicide runoff and effects on non-target animals. Matt earned his PhD at the University of Mississippi in biology with an emphasis on environmental toxicology. His dissertation examined the fate of pesticides in a constructed wetland. It was funded by the USDA Agricultural Research Service's National Sedimentation Laboratory. After a one-year postdoc appointment with Arkansas State University, he was hired by USDA-ARS as a permanent federal scientist studying significant water quality issues. For 21 years, he served as a bench scientist within the Water Quality and Ecology Research Unit. In 2021, he was selected as the research leader of the Water Quality and Ecology Research Unit at the National Sedimentation Laboratory. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Abby. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's so wonderful to have you on today. So we are talking about tailwater recovery systems and how they can affect agriculture and water quality. So to get us started, can you just tell us more about what these systems are, how they work, and how they interface with agriculture and water?
Sure. So agriculture obviously is a huge industry. It's a very important industry. Our nation was founded on agriculture. And so agriculture needs water to produce crops. Now, we certainly have some areas in the world that are in the United States too that can produce crops, dryland crops, but for the most part, and especially in the Mississippi Delta region, which is where I focus my work on, we need water to produce crops to keep up with the rising population and the rising needs that people have. So as the population has grown, the need for water has grown, and unfortunately we're kind of split here. We have a dual problem because agriculture relies on water resources, and that results in water quantity issues. So again, especially in the Mississippi Delta region, we have a decline in our aquifer, which is where most of our groundwater is pumped from that farmers use if they use groundwater. So we've seen these declines over the years, and it's getting deeper and deeper that farmers have to go and get water from, and it's getting harder. It's also reducing the amount of water that farmers can take because there's a limited amount of water in an aquifer. And that's not just for agriculture. Cities use that for their drinking water. So we're trying to be mindful of that. But the problem is we have used a lot of water historically, and so we've depleted our aquifer quite a bit. We're working on different ways that we can recharge that aquifer. And the other issue, not just water quantity, the other issue that we face is water quality. Most people are really familiar with that one. You think about the dead zone or the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico. You don't have to go very far, and you'll read in the news about water quality issues related to agriculture, whether it's from pesticides or nutrient runoff. So really, to kind of address this issue, we have been looking at different possibilities, different conservation practices, and one of those is using tailwater recovery systems. And so these are actually systems that are put on the farm in collaboration with a farmer and generally the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is another branch of USDA. And what these systems are designed to do is to capture rainfall, because, again, and I'm speaking from the Mississippi Delta region, we get an extraordinary amount of rainfall. The problem is it comes at the wrong times. We need the water during the summer to irrigate our crops. Most of our water comes in the winter and the spring. And so what folks and farmers are trying to do now is to construct these tailwater recovery systems. And each tailwater recovery system looks a little bit different, depends on the farmer, depends on how much land he has and is willing to utilize. But most of these systems will have what's called an on-farm pond storage, which is basically a large reservoir. And again, this depends on how much land the farmer has that he's willing to take out of production. It also involves a pump system with pipes, underground pipes, where the water can be transferred from the on-pond reservoir to different farms, different pieces of his farm that he can irrigate from. They also include typically a tailwater ditch, which is just, it's really another large reservoir of water, but it collects the runoff. And in perfect tailwater systems, it's a closed system. So all of the water that runs off the field is then collected into the ditch and transported back into the on-farm reservoir. And so that's where we hope that tailwater recovery systems would be as a closed system, but in reality, most of them are open. And so there is still some water that's leaving the tailwater recovery system.
Sure. So then you were trying to figure out how well these are working and what is in the water in these in different ways. So can you tell me a little bit more about kind of your research goals for this particular project?
Sure. So when the aquifer became depleted, the Natural Resources Conservation Service really encouraged farmers in the Mississippi Delta to put in these tailwater recovery systems. And they did. And they gave a lot of funding to help the farmers do that, which was great. The problem is we really didn't have much research on these tailwater recovery systems. So they were originally billed as obviously to help with the water quantity issue, that farmers could collect their rainwater and that they could irrigate with this water and then reuse it. Well, some people thought, well, if we reuse this water, then if the water already has nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in it, then maybe we won't have to irrigate or we won't have to add as much fertilizer to our lands if that's the way that we're doing it. That was just a thought. Nobody really knew anything. So our research goals were really just to find out what water quality benefits will a tailwater recovery system really offer a farmer? There have been a few studies that were very specific here and there in the Mississippi Delta, but there's nothing that's really been kind of extended. And so we wanted to do kind of I'll say long term, but it was only 3 to 5 years. And I guess that's your perspective of whether that's long term or not. But we looked at something a little bit longer than just a year. So really 3 to 5 years is kind of where we set our goal. And what we wanted to do was just say, hey, what's the water quality at the reservoir in the tailwater ditch? How does that change seasonally? What are really the nutrients? We looked at the nutrients and the pesticides. I know today we're kind of talking just about the pesticides. And so we just wanted to know what kind of pesticides were there. What do they do at different seasons? How do their concentrations change? Do they change? Does the tailwater recovery system kind of clean up the pesticides? Just try to get a little bit better understanding of what the pesticides are doing in this type of system.
Sure. How long have these systems been around?
So, tailwater recovery systems have been around probably about 10 years. Really, only about the last 5 or 6 years were they really popular. They've been a conservation practice for a while, but most farmers didn't implement them because of the cost and the land that's involved. So not only there's construction cost, but there's also taking land out of production. That's not really common that farmers really want to do that. What drove this in the Mississippi Delta region is because of our groundwater depletion, and farmers recognized that they needed a different way to irrigate. And so it really picked up in the Mississippi Delta, and a lot of farmers realized that the future for their sustainability, they needed to start implementing these tailwater recovery systems.
Sure. Well, that's very cool. I feel like in the grand scheme of agriculture, that's very new. um,
It is.
so that's very exciting. So you've gone over your research goals a little bit. So can you tell me more about how you were able to test on these many questions and what you were doing?
Sure, sure. So what we started off with was pretty generic. What we did for 6 years was we would go out and we would grab what we call just routine grab samples of surface water. So we didn't have anything automated set out there. Just every 2 weeks we would go out. We'd send a team out, and they would get grab samples. So they would go out into the water and actually pull a sample of water back, and we would bring that back. And they sampled from the tailwater recovery pond. They also sampled from the tailwater recovery ditch. So those were the main things that we were interested in. So that was 6 years. Now, the halfway through that, we decided we wanted to add maybe a little bit of a twist to this. Even though they were going out every 2 weeks, we wanted to do a focused sampling for seasonal changes. A lot of general water quality folks like to know what's going on seasonally, and we might have been able to tease that apart from our previous work, but we wanted to just do a little bit extra. So for the last 3 years, we did these what we called um, seasonal samples. So we did it in the summer, and the fall, the winter, and the spring, and we included some extra sites. Um, Sites that were above our tailwater recovery system, sites that were outside our tailwater recovery system, to kind of give a control as to what was really going on within the system itself, and to see, because this wasn't a closed system, if water was coming out, what was the quality of the water coming out. So we would send out a large team that would collect these water samples. We put the water samples on ice, bring them back immediately to the laboratory, and we would start our processing there. And they would be processed immediately, and then they would be handed off. We had a team that was focusing on the nutrients, but we also had a team that was focusing on the pesticides. And for our pesticide work, they were analyzed for what we found were some common pesticides. Now, a lot of people, when we say we analyze for pesticides, they think of the old TV show CSI, and they have these wonderful, cool chromatographs, and they pop in a sample, and then it just says, this is what everything is. Well, that's not reality. We can't do that. And so there are hundreds and hundreds of pesticides, really, that are out there. We chose to focus on about 30 that we knew from over 30 years, really, of pesticide experience. We kind of targeted how many pesticides we wanted to analyze for. And the cool thing about this is not all of these pesticides are currently being used. We also targeted pesticides which were that had been banned for years. Some of them were banned the year that I was born. I won't tell you when that was, but we've had pesticides that are current use. And again, we were focusing on those pesticides that we thought would be of best interest, and the ones that we thought we'd get the most information from. So we handed that off to our pesticide chemist, and they were able to do an analysis on that. And so we got some really cool results by looking at it both seasonally and just looking at it every 2 weeks. What's going on? What are the pesticides doing?
Sure. Yeah. even that you could do 30 is amazing to me. That
It
seems
took a
like a
long
lot.
it takes a long time. It's expensive. It's labor intensive. And that's the reason why we had to narrow it down. Again, I know, some people would like to know what pesticide, how many pesticides are in there. And there are some agencies that are able to do that. I know the USGS is able to do that, but they're a lot larger agency focused on a different mission. And so we really had to narrow it down. So again, this suite of pesticides that we look for are those that we just know from decades of experience. These are the ones that are being used in the Delta. These are the ones that are probably going to show up on your scan, and so that's kind of how we had to tease it apart. I mean, if I had unlimited amounts of resources and unlimited amount of money, I would love to find out every possible pesticide that was there, but we weren't able to do that.
Sure. Well, still very cool. I'm going to loop back for some additional questions that have occurred to me while you've been speaking. So my first one is, why are water quality scientists interested in the seasonal aspect of that? Like, what about that interests them?
Okay, so the seasonal aspect is really important because for different types of ecosystems and ecosystem services, seasonal trends are very important. And one of the reasons is the pesticides obviously have an impact on non-target organisms. So when you apply a pesticide, usually if you say you apply a herbicide, you're targeting a plant, but there are also small organisms. There are invertebrates. There are insects. There are things that are out there that are going to get impacted from that herbicide. And so it's important for us to know seasonally what's going on, because some of these insects or invertebrates are coming out at different times of the year. Sometimes they're only out in the spring. Sometimes they're only out in the spring and fall. Sometimes they emerge in early winter. And so just knowing what's going on seasonally helps us to understand what kind of potential threat there may be to non-target organisms. And non-targets also include fish. I mean, just anything that the pesticide isn't directly intended to affect.
Sure, sure. That makes a lot of sense. And then my other question, reaching back even further, is about how these systems are implemented on a farm. I was just talking to someone else who works in the Mississippi area this morning, and they were talking about how the land is like precision level. And so I'm wondering, how are you directing water to, like, is it a moat of a ditch? Is it just on a slope that these can be implemented? Can you implement them on the flat ground? Is it drainage underneath? Like, what's going on with how these actually get installed?
That is a great question. And that's probably the biggest difficulty that we face in the Mississippi Delta. We are obviously flat. And so our elevation is very small. The change in elevation is very small. So it's really difficult to do this. And precision leveling has really taken off across the United States and across really the Mississippi Delta. And precision leveling is great. It's wonderful for agriculture. It makes it a challenge if you're trying to create and construct some of these settings. And honestly, this was one of the greatest challenges that we had, because when the farmer and he had a contractor that constructed this particular tailwater recovery system. Unfortunately, the contractor did not put the outflow pipes in correctly. And so when we had a large rainfall event, water actually backed up into the pipe rather than water coming out of the pipe. And again, this all goes back to the lack of elevation change. It's so flat, it's so difficult, and so it really is a challenge to construct these. What usually ends up happening is that the farmer will have to dig their tailwater recovery ditch a little deeper than normal. just so that the water won't backflow from the ditch into the field. But it's a huge undertaking when the farmer agrees to do this. Again, and we've worked with farmers who have had the on-farm reservoir. We've also worked with farmers who've just had a tailwater recovery ditch. They collect all of their runoff into the tailwater recovery ditch and then pump it back out into their fields. So that's why I said at the beginning, it really does depend on the individual farmer, what kind of tailwater recovery system he has. But for those that have the on-farm storage reservoir, again, it's going to be as large as they want it to be. First of all, that they're willing to give the land up. But second of all, how many acres do they want to irrigate from that? So that's why we see a lot of farmers just using a kind of a large tailwater recovery ditch without the reservoir, because they don't want to give up too much land and they want to really kind of use it as supplement. Now, I've talked about this as a method of irrigation. A lot of the farmers that we use a combination of irrigation. So they will combine groundwater with this surface water. Um, so they're still pumping from the groundwater. They're just not pumping as much from the groundwater and from the aquifer. So these are, again, they're highly constructed systems. It takes a lot of financial investment when they do this, but they work very closely with USDA's NRCS. And they have engineers out there that design everything, and then they implement that. So it's a big undertaking, but farmers are really understanding the need to do this, that they've got to change their irrigation practices in order to be sustainable. They'll either run out of water and may not be farming soon, or they can do something about it, which, like I said, a lot of them are doing, and they're modifying their irrigation practices. And this is just one way. There are a lot of other conservation practices that focus on different types of irrigation, and tailwater recovery is just one of those.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Matt's paper, Pesticide Trends in a Tailwater Recovery System in the Mississippi Delta, published in Agrosystems Geosciences and Environment, is always freely available. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Thanks again also to our sponsor, Meter Group. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their new podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers leverage environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. Thank you for being our sponsor. Let's get back to the show. Sure. Yeah, that's great. I just learned about precision leveling like 3 hours ago. So this is very exciting to me that these are overlapping.
Very timely.
Yes, very excited to learn more about that in future. But right now, I would love to hear about your results. What did you find?
Okay, so it was it was a mixed bag, what we found, and the main thing that we found were the typical pesticides that we would expect. Atrazine, which is a very common herbicide used on corn. We found atrazine and its metabolites. That's something that I didn't mention before is we were analyzing for these pesticides, but for some of the pesticides, we're also interested in the metabolites. And the metabolites are just kind of their breakdown products. So atrazine is the parent product, the parent compound, but it had two metabolites that we also analyzed for. And that just kind of shows how fast the parent compound is breaking down. But atrazine was a very common pesticide that we found, along with its two metabolites. They were found in every season that we sampled. They were found in the tailwater recovery ditch. It was also found in the tailwater reservoir itself. Propanil is another very common herbicide. it was found just like atrazine, all seasons, pretty much all of the sites. Propanil is used a lot in soybeans, but also a lot in rice. So in areas that have rice, the particular area we were working in didn't have a lot of rice, but they did have some rice growing in there. Metolachlor is another very common herbicide. It's often mixed with atrazine, and that's how it's applied in corn and soybeans. So it's very common if you have atrazine, you're going to see metolachlor. Again, another very popular herbicide. We found a lot of the pyrethroid insecticides, bifenthrin, cyfluthrin, zeta-cypermethrin, they're very commonly used in cotton, soybeans, corn, those types of crops. So that really didn't surprise us that we found them that often. It was a little bit surprising, I guess, that they were in every season. Normally, you would hope that you would only see them in the seasons that they're applied. But this just goes to show that some of these can be resilient. Some of the pesticides can hang around for a while. And some of them, it's very possible, and this is just kind of conjecture on our part and what we're thinking. But, some of these may be bound to the soil at some point in time, but then at a different season, maybe because the water quality changes, it gets cooler, or the pH of the water changes. Maybe some of that interacts with the chemistry and allows the pesticide to be released from the soil. That's just one of the thoughts that we had about that. But another cool thing that we found, which is it's cool, but it's also kind of eye-opening, and that's we found some pesticides there that have not been used in a long time, and one of those was DDT. DDT was banned over 50 years ago, but we still see the effects and concentrations, I should say, really the concentrations. We see the concentrations of DDT and its metabolites still today in samples. And I've been working here with the Agriculture Research Service for almost 23 years. And in every project that we've collected water samples in the Mississippi Delta, inevitably we will still get some responses that show DDT. DDT was heavily used for a long time, and it was, our area was cotton. It is an insecticide, and it was used for a variety of things, and farmers utilized it. It was very effective. The problem is that it's also very long term, and we didn't really understand, I think, how long term this pesticide is, but it hangs around. Obviously, it hasn't been used. If it has been used, it's been used illegally, but I can assure you that none of our farmers use that. But it's 50 years after its last use, and we're still seeing concentrations, which just goes to show you some of the original pesticides, their half-lives are very long. And that's something that farmers, that scientists, researchers, conservationists, we're all interested in, and we're all working to the same goal to be able to utilize pesticides that are efficient, that are effective, but that do not obviously harm the environment, but also that don't hang around a long time in the environment. And that's been the transition in pesticide chemistry over the last probably 20 to 30 years, is designing pesticides that are not going to be around as long as the early pesticides like DDT. But that was some of the cool things that we found. Something hasn't been used in 50 years is still showing up. That was just one of them. We also found a couple of other old pesticides that would have a few hits here and there. DDT was the consistent one. It was found in every season, whether we were in the ditch or whether we were in the reservoir. Some of the other old pesticides, we would see a few hits here and there. They're confirmed. It wasn't a false positive. They are confirmed hits, but it was much more scattered than the DDT that we found all of the time.
Sure. So then, I know you had mentioned that there was some interest in, recycling for like nutrients. And then obviously if you're recycling, there could be some of these pesticides in there. So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit more about both like the concentrations of these, and because I think people I would easily be alarmed if someone said there's pesticide in this water that I'm putting on, my crops, if it's not the way that I'm intending to add it to that system. But also if there's any capacity in these systems to capture that, take it out of either the environment or out of the water before it goes back onto the crops. Can you just talk about some of those results or considerations?
Sure, sure. And those are all very valid questions and questions that we would ask ourselves. My training was in toxicology, as you pointed out. So effects are a big thing. I want to know what's the effect of this. Just because I report a concentration, that really doesn't mean anything to most folks. We want to know what kind of effects are going on. And really, as a side note to this, we did an effects study with a toxicity test organism on a limited amount of samples. And what they found was that this did have, in certain areas at certain times of the year, there were some effects on non-target organisms. And so that's very important to keep in mind. The other thing to remember is, and sometimes people hear this, and please don't misunderstand me, they get very concerned about concentrations. These concentrations are in a farm setting. They're not around drinking water. Most of the criteria that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency sets is for drinking water. There are general water quality criteria that everyone has to meet, that we need to meet, as far as water in the rivers and lakes and streams and things like that. None of our concentrations were at that level that were exceeding any type of EPA requirement. They were above our detection limits, and we have very sensitive detection limits, but they were above our detection limits, but not at a concentration that a regulatory agency would come back and say, we're going to shut you down because you've got too much water or too much pesticide in the concentration, because we're talking about really parts per billion, and most of these we're talking about subparts per billion. Now let me give you an example. For atrazine in the summer, we measured 21 parts per billion. Now 21 parts per billion sounds a lot when I tell you that another concentration that we found of say propanil, which was another common herbicide, it was at 0.006 parts per billion, which is very, very small. So you may say, well, my gosh, the atrazine is in there a lot. It's amplified, 21 parts per billion. What's that going to do? Really, 21 parts per billion is not that high for atrazine. It doesn't exceed any of the water quality criteria for this particular type of setting that we have. But it can be alarming if you hear that you have that type of concentration. Obviously, you wouldn't want that type of concentration in your groundwater well. If you had a house in a rural area, you don't want pesticides. You don't want measurable pesticides. And I understand that. I grew up in the same type of area. And when that water comes out of the pump in the well, you don't want anything in there. But for these systems, it was pretty much what we kind of expected as far as concentration goes. Again, we didn't expect all of them to be there at different seasons like we saw it, but we're led by the data and led by the results that we receive. Now, to the point of, can we get rid of this, it brings about a great question, and as a researcher, this is what we love to do. We generally ask more questions than we solve, and what this did was it did bring up a good question. Can we clean up this water? And although it wasn't part of this study, it is directly related to what we do in our other research. Most of these areas, and especially in the tailwater ditch is very deep, it's very large, it's meant to hold water, and that's the primary purpose. What we know from our research and from my personal research for 23 years, is that there are ways that we can utilize those systems to help clean the water a little bit. And that's through a process called phytoremediation, which is a big, a big term that just means using plants to clean the water. And so what we have found out is that there are different types of plants, and a lot of them are just normal native plants that when you drive down the road you see anyway. Cattails, cut grass, just very common things. You may not even know their name or what they look like, but if I described them, you would say, "Yep, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is." So what we know is these types of plants are able to clean the water, and they're able to actually sorb pesticides. It's still kind of a black box as to how that happens. Does it happen through the roots? Does it happen through the shoots? Is it physical, where the pesticides bind to the plants? Does the pesticide or does the plant metabolize the pesticide? How does all that work? A lot of questions that we don't have those answers for, but we do know that by having vegetation in these ditches, it's able to clean the water. You can have a high concentration of pesticides coming into a ditch, and if it has a bunch of vegetation in it, when it leaves, it has less concentrations of pesticides. So one of the ways that we can certainly work within these tailwater recovery systems to maybe help reduce the pesticide concentration is to have some sort of plants in the recovery ditch. Again, that's a challenge because the ditches are deep. And so, we may have to focus on having the vegetation on the edges of the ditch rather than all the way across the ditch. So those are just things that we've got to look into, but there are certainly ways that we can do that. And there are a lot of other great conservation practices that are being thought about and implemented using different types of additives, biochar, gypsum. There are a lot of additives that you can add to water that will help flock out pesticides. They'll bind to pesticides and then settle out, so they're not transported in the water. So again, all great options, and kind of, if we were to look at our end result from this, that would certainly be one of the next steps, that we need to look at ways that we can reduce the concentration a little bit. So there's the future research right there.
Yeah. That's wonderful. It is always fun how research kind of just leads into more research. There's never no more questions
That's
to
right.
ask.
We have an abundance of questions. That's
Yes.
Job security. We'll be working for a long time.
Yeah, there you go. So then, I think I kind of know how you're going to answer this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So for farmers right now, based on these results, like, what are your recommendations? Would you say you should, or here's some things that you should consider, or, next year we're releasing the gypsum version, so just wait, just talk to me about, like, recommendations or things that farmers should be thinking about when they consider these kinds of systems.
Okay. There are a lot of considerations. Obviously, the first consideration that the farmer has to make is, how much is this going to cost? What is going to be my rate of return? And with environmental benefits, it's kind of hard to get what's your rate of return going to be. And so how we address this with farmers is, generally they will come to us and say, we're interested in putting in a tailwater recovery system. What do we need to be concerned about? What do we need to worry about? And so one of the things that we talk with them is this going to be an open system, or is this going to be a closed system? Are you going to capture all of your water, or will some of your water be released? If some of the water is going to be released, then we will address it much like what you and I have just talked about. There are some ways that we can set up some extra steps for mitigation. One of the things would be a sediment retention pond that can be installed. And again, this just it adds to the cost, it adds to the construction. But a sediment retention pond at their outflow could certainly help, where things can settle out, slow down before it leaves and goes into another series of ditches, and eventually enters up into a river, a lake, or a stream, or something like that. Adding vegetation on purpose to some of these areas is very important if you're going to have an open system. Um, those are really the main things. And again, we can work on how much water is held in that ditch through different things. We can talk to them about weirs and holding the water back, allowing things to settle out. Because if the water's flowing fast out of your system, then you really aren't going to capture and you're not really going to clean the water very much. If you can kind of slow it down a little bit, you can add, again, the plants. You can add things like gypsum and biochar and wood chips. There are just a lot of opportunities to do that. If you have a closed system, it's a little bit different. You are recycling your water, and generally we're not too worried about the concentrations because over time, the concentrations will continually break down. As the temperatures go up in the summer, it tends to break down a lot of our pesticides because of the sun beating down on it, the chemistry of the pesticide, it'll just break down a little bit easier. So a closed system is really our preferred system. We like it. It's kind of a double-edged sword. We don't have any runoff to measure, which is kind of a bummer for us, but it's nice because they are truly recycling all of their water, and they're able to use it multiple times. So what we tell those folks, and really we would tell the open system the same way, you need to be cognizant of the fact that there are pesticides in this water. Now, does that impact your crop? Probably not. Not at the concentrations that we've seen. But there's a potential, depending upon what types of chemicals that you use, there is a potential for maybe some cross contamination. Um, and there are some real specific pesticides that people use that you would use on one crop that you may not use on another. So farmers, and of course the good news about this is that the farmer is doing his own system, so he knows exactly what's being applied. Now, yes, there are pesticides that get transferred through the atmosphere and settle out, but not at concentrations really that we're worried about. But this farmer does need to think about, if I use this particular herbicide and it shows up in the water and I recirculate that water, can I still use that on maybe a different crop? And the farmer that we used, or the farmer that we worked with, really, he had multiple crops. And so he used multiple pesticides, very different classes of pesticides. But all of those pesticides, um, none of those pesticides, I should say, really impacted his crop in a negative way. But that is probably one of the bigger worries that we have, is potential for cross contamination. Not a guarantee, not anything to say the sky is falling or be scared about. It's just to be cognizant. Hey, if you use atrazine and propanil and metolachlor, you need to be careful about the crops that you're growing or the crops that you're irrigating with. Easy way around that is not to irrigate a particular crop that may get cross-contaminated. The farmer with these pipes, the way that they irrigate, they can shut one pipe off and not irrigate a particular field. So I think the benefits of this certainly outweigh any potential costs or cons of the system. I think the system is phenomenal. Um, Farmers are very skilled at utilizing what they have, and I think it's probably one of the best conservation practices that I've seen that address both water quality and water quantity. We did kind of debunk the myth through this story, or through this research, and also some other research that I was focused on with graduate students at Mississippi State University. Kind of debunked the myth that you don't have to add fertilizer if you utilize your water with nutrients. And again, I know we're focused on pesticides, but I think that's an important aspect to kind of tell folks, is that was just a thought, and it really doesn't pan out when we did the research. Um, the concentrations of the concentrations of the nutrients weren't concentrations that the plants could utilize, and it really wasn't even in the correct form that a plant could utilize for growth. So nutrients we weren't as worried about recycling. Pesticides, that kind of gives you a little bit of pause for concern. What pesticides are showing up? What concentrations are they? Yeah, just keeping in mind, hey, there may be some interaction. Again, we're not say the sky's falling. It's just be aware of what you're doing and which crops you're irrigating with water that you're reusing.
Sure. Is there any type of farm, and this could be in the Mississippi area or expanding this to other regions, that you'd be like, this is just not going to work on your farm? Is there any characteristic of a farm that would make this not really work?
Yeah, so a lot of this has to do with soil type. And fortunately, the soil type that we're working with is kind of a silty loam to a clay soil. So we've got some farmers that we work with that have a tailwater recovery system, and it took a lot of work. Because they had a lot of sandy soil. So obviously, if you say if you're farming in sandy soils, the chances of this working are pretty slim to none, because your water's not going to stay there. It's just going to seep down into the groundwater, and it'll recharge the aquifer a little bit. That's the good news, but you can't hold it. So you've got to have a kind of a silty loam or a clay base to these things. Again, that's one of the reasons that sometimes the farmers have to dig down quite a bit to hit a layer that's going to be a barrier that's able to hold this. But I think really what we're seeing as far as agriculture goes is most of these tailwater recovery systems are in areas that are heavily or heavy agriculture, intensive agriculture, and the crops are very water intensive. The amount of water is different. But I think any time that a farmer can capture rainfall in any sort of form, fashion, and hold that water for irrigation, I think that's a great opportunity. Again, most farmers may not have that resource available to them, but for those that do, I think they're encouraging their sustainability. I think long term, it's something that will really benefit the farmer.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for just laying out the pros and cons and considerations. Appreciate that. So we already touched on future research, but is there anything else you would like to add for just different areas that you or your team are expanding into with these systems?
Yeah, this again, it's a great opportunity for research. There are a lot of questions, a lot of the questions that are ecosystem kind of impact study that I talked briefly about, where we used a toxicity experiment with a toxicity organism and kind of saw the effects. I think that's kind of really our natural next progression, is to find out more in depth. Again, that was a very limited test and a limited experiment that we ran with that. So I think it's important that we need to see not only the chemistry of what's going on, but really what's going on as far as effects go. Because that's the next step that people want to know is, what's going to happen to the ecosystem in general. Will we have these impacts? So I see that as kind of a natural progression. The other natural progression that I see with our research is really to focus on trying to implement this and encourage farmers to do this in as many ways, in as many available systems as possible, whether it's a large system, a small system. The system that we worked on was fairly large. um, it it was a good opportunity, but I would love to see even small farmers utilize these ditches. I could talk all day about ditches. Ditches are my passion. That's a lot of where my research is. Ditches are a great opportunity for farmers to not only store water, but also to clean water. And normally, when we talk about ditches, a farmer thinks my ditch is just to get the water off the field, and so my crop doesn't drown. And I understand that, and I agree wholeheartedly. But they really do serve a lot of other purposes, a lot of ecosystem services. So what I would like to see are a variety of ditches on farms really utilizing this and recirculating their water And we've got farmers that do that just on their own. That just they said, I want to do this. I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm not getting any kind of funding. It's just something that I feel passionate about as a landowner, and I know that to survive the next 15, 20 years, I'm going to have to do something. So, really, just to gather more information about that. This was a fun study. It was a great study, but it's only on one site, one research site in one area of the Mississippi Delta. And so, I would like to expand this into many other types of tailwater recovery system. And that way, we could really give a better answer to, do these tailwater recovery systems really work, and what's the range that you can expect to see in benefit from these recovery systems. Because like I said, there wasn't much done. There were just a handful of studies that have been done by Mississippi State and some others in the Mississippi Delta. And we need more research. I know that's what every researcher will say. We need more research, but the truth, I mean, that's the truth. We do, and we need to see it in a variety of systems, in large systems, small systems, medium systems, in systems that just have a ditch, and some systems just have a reservoir, and they don't really utilize the ditch. So there are a variety of systems, and we really need to analyze all of those so that we can go back to the farmer, or so any farmer can say, hey, I farm 180 acres. I've got this one ditch. What can I expect? What can I do? Because we're really about solutions, and we want to give every farmer a solution that's applicable to them, and really help them out. So that's 30 years worth of research right there that I talked about. So hopefully we'll be starting on that soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Single step on a long journey. Exciting stuff. So I have 3 questions left for you. The first one is, where can listeners go if they want to learn more about this topic?
So if they're really interested in tailwater recovery systems, you can go on the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service's website, and you can find out all you want to know about conservation practices, and it will tell you the specifics for a tailwater recovery system, what they require as far as their engineering design for a tailwater recovery system. Or you can go on our website. ARS has a website just as well, and you can search for tailwater recovery systems, and it will pop up all of the different ARS research units that have published work on tailwater recovery systems. And you can always call me or email me, either one. I will be glad to talk to anybody about tailwater recovery systems, what we learned, kind of the pitfalls that we found out. So we're always happy to share that information with folks that are interested.
For sure. We will have all of that information in our show notes. So then if people want to take the next step and start getting involved with any of these, either as researchers or farmers or general public, what can they do?
Well, specifically for farmers, the first step would be to contact their NRCS office, their local or regional NRCS office, and just talk to the district conservationist about ways that they could potentially implement a tailwater recovery system. There is some obviously a significant cost to it, but there's also some cost sharing to that. Any type of researcher that's interested in this, certainly, again, they can contact any of us. But I would suggest, if this is a research interest that you want to focus on, go out and talk to some farmers, meet some farmers, establish that relationship with farmers, and just tell them, you want to help them, you want to partner with them to give to find out some great information about this, and see where that goes. And as for the public, if you live in a rural area, or if you have farmers that you're related to, encourage them to consider this as a conservation measure, because it really does benefit everyone, because you will be hopefully reducing the amount of groundwater that's being used. And so it affects people whether they're in rural communities or whether they're in urban and industrial areas. If we run out of water, we're all going to be in trouble. So we've got to work on ways that we can protect the water quantity as well as the water quality.
Absolutely. Those are some great tips for people looking to get started. Final question for you is, what is one fact that listeners wouldn't know about you if all they had was your research?
I I always use one of the same things, whether this is this type of question or this is an icebreaker at any social event that we go to. Now, I grew up in Arkansas. I live in Mississippi, so take that with a grain of salt. But I always like to tell everybody that my uncle is also my cousin. And that usually gets a lot of laughs from folks because, yeah, you grew up in the South, you grew up in Mississippi. Well, it turns out my dad and his cousin married two sisters. So legitimately, my uncle is also my cousin. But that's, that's our family tree is a fun fact, and we like to have fun with that.
Sure. Well, that's a very fun fact. And this has been just really interesting research, really important research. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us and chat about it and for the work you're doing. And yeah, thanks for being on.
Thank you, Abby. This has been a great opportunity. We really appreciate it.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Student Spotlight, where we highlight the work of graduate and undergraduate society student members. Today, we'll be talking to Sachin Danda. Welcome to the show. Can you start us off by introducing yourself and where you're studying?
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Sachin Dhanda, and I'm a third year PhD student in the Department of Agronomy studying weed science at Kansas State University under the supervision of Dr. Vipan Kumar and Dr. Anita Dile.
Wonderful. And what are you currently researching?
So, my research is primarily focused on understanding the geographical distribution of multiple herbicide-resistant kochia in the Great Plains. Also, I am trying to develop integrated strategies to manage multiple herbicide-resistant kochia like cover crops and herbicide mixtures under the no-till dryland production system in the Great Plains.
Awesome. And if you could have your dream research project, what would that be?
Yeah, sure. So I want to reduce the impact of weeds on crop yields to sustain the global food security. Also, I enjoy research and teaching. Therefore, I want to pursue a career in weed science in an academic setting.
Awesome. If you'd like to get in touch with Sachin about his work, we'll have his contact information in our show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and best wishes on your future studies and career. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on the show and highlighting my research. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.